Well, it looks like it's 2 o'clock on the nose.
Perfect.
So, John, if you want to go ahead and start, I think we're
Well, thank
ready.
you. I had so much fun cooking all these things. I cook each recipe that I talk about. Not that I haven't been cooking them for a long, long time. I've been making soufflés for 45 years or more. Uh, and I've been in restaurant staffs that had them on the menu. So soufflés are, so old hat to me. But I dusted off each of these in with my current thinking of new thoughts about ingredients and using new equipment to do the old recipes. So I had fun doing them. And the first one I want to jump in on are the soufflés, savory soufflés. So let's go ahead, please. Two classic, two wonderful, wonderful resources for soufflés is a recipe in Good Eats by Daniel Gritzer, and this is a very, very definitive technique. He got recipes together from 10 different sources and made a matrix of 10 different sources, souffle ingredients and ratios, and compared them. And I mean, it really is great, great reading. I highly recommend it. That's on Good Eats, or just Google Good Eats savory cheese souffle recipe. The second one is in Julia's book that she considered her premier work, her capstone work near the end of her career, and that's The Way to Cook. So her cheese souffle recipe is very definitive, and I'm not going to invent anything new here, but I do want to tell you my take on classic souffle. It's intimidating. Every chef in the world will groan when someone orders a souffle. And it's not that they're worried about the souffle rising. It will rise. You put egg whites and cheese and a bechamel together and put it in the oven at a high enough temperature, it will rise dramatically and brown beautifully, and it will be delicious. But you only have minutes to put it in front of the guest where it looks good, or it looks like you've served a flat tire to them. And so that's every chef's horror story about soufflés. So you don't see them all the time on menus because it's so perishable. The flavor is wonderful. But go ahead, please, Jonathan. So the first thing you got to do is have the gear to whip egg whites. In this particular recipe that I'm providing to you, it calls for 5 egg whites, 4 egg yolks. Okay, we'll put the egg yolks over in the bechamel, make a bechamel, and then enrich it with the 4 egg yolks. But the egg whites, we're going to beat to firm, some might call it stiff peaks, but we want firm, moist egg whites. And in that Good Eats recipe, he recommends doing it by hand. I do not. Whipping 5 egg whites to the volume that you see in that picture in the upper right it's feasible, but it's not practical. Don't do it. And also, don't use a little light mixer like I'm showing here. That came out of my camper, and it had a little spindly whip to beat whites. And that's what my wife's bridge partners used to call sending a boy to do a man's job. You don't want a little puny beater to do 5 egg whites. You want the big boy. And so here's my 45-year-old mixer that just keeps on. It's at the end of its service life because I can't find any place to repair it anymore. There used to be a company around here in the Northland that would do it, but now no one will do it. So when its gears are gone, I'll just have to replace it with another 5-quart. But this one is, as long as it keeps going, I'll use it, and it's wonderful. Okay, the second part of the souffle is the making of the bechamel. We talked about that before. It's just a roux and equal part butter and equal parts flour and butter, lightly cooked 2 or 3 minutes. We don't want any browning there. And then we roll in the liquid, in this case, milk, whole milk is recommended. And then after that, we get that off the fire, put it in another pan that's big enough to where we can incorporate the whites that come from the mixer and fold those in, fold in the cheese, fold in the egg yolks, all of that there to make that luscious batter, put it in our ramekin or our souffle dish and level the top. I've never done that. I've been making these things since the early 70s, and I have never, ever leveled the top. But in reading the 2 capstone recipes from Good Eats and from Julia, I see that I really should have been doing that all along. It really helps. It really helps level the top after you put it in the dish. And another thing I want to say before I go on is just fill your souffle dish to that line, to where the little rim is still there. Now you want that rim coated with butter and the Parmesan cheese that we'll talk about all the way up to the top, but don't put your souffle batter above that line. It needs that line for the sides of the souffle to climb and hold the souffle structure up. Okay, next slide, please. So here are the savory souffle ingredients. That's equal parts butter and flour, cup of milk, and Gruyere cheese. I want to say more about Gruyere cheese later, but this is really the preferred cheese of all to my taste. It gives that authentic European flavor to the souffle. And yes, you can make a beautiful souffle and a tangy and aromatic, delicious souffle with cheddar cheese, but it doesn't do the effort justice, I don't believe, to have a common cheddar cheese flavor. I think it really does need Gruyere. And that's a hard cheese to find in the Kansas City Northland. I drove all over the place looking. Of course, better cheddar and all the other excellent cheese stores have it in spades and lots of it in different varieties and so forth. But genuine Gruyere is worth seeking out, and Parmesan also an ingredient for the coating the sides. Good Parmesan, they really help. Egg yolks, you see 4 egg yolks. Dijon is an unusual flavoring, but it's good. I recommend it. It complements that Gruyere cheese, and then a pinch of cayenne, pepper. And here's something that's strange I've never done before. I learned 2 things in reading the Good Eats recipe. One is level the top, and 2 is cold egg whites. That runs counter to everything I've taught for my 20 years in professional kitchens. I would never, ever have come up with the idea of whipping cold egg whites. In fact, we always made a big deal about getting them to slightly above room temperature for better volume. These guys say cold. I did it cold, and it worked perfectly, just perfectly. So cold egg whites. Okay. So and a cold dish. After I took my souffle dish, I've never done this before. After I buttered the sides of my souffle dish and put the Parmesan, the grated Parmesan, very fine, grated Parmesan around the sides. Then you put the souffle dish in the refrigerator and it holds there. Mine was at room temperature while I was doing all the other stuff, getting everything else ready. The sides of my souffle dish were weeping. And so it sets it and holds it to the sides if you put the souffle dish in the refrigerator. So 2 techniques. I apologize. I thought we got through election day, but they're still calling me. Okay, now folding it in. Chefs debate this all the time, but the folding technique of not whipping. So if you have a whip in your hand, you have a tendency to whip. And so you can fold with the whip, that's fine, but better to fold these things in with a spatula so that you aren't deflating, overbeating, causing your batter to collapse before you get it in the pan. And then I cooked my souffle for this talk at 375 for 35 minutes. It really browned beautifully. It really was aromatic. It was really, and it was done in the middle, set to the degree of doneness that my family prefers. A Frenchman, they want runny omelets, they want runny eggs, they want runny whites. I mean, they like that. They really do like it. They're like a molten cake. But most what my customers have wanted is set in the center. So it's not intuitive, but I recommend that you cook it at 375 if you want it set in the middle. But if you prefer the European style of very loose, moist, kind of runny center, then you cook it at 400 for a little less time. That's counterintuitive, but the lower temperature will cook it all the way through better in 35 minutes. So that works for me. Next slide, please. I got to get off this subject here. Okay, so that's enough said. My souffle dish is ancient. Honestly, we got it in mid 70s. About 76, and we've been using it ever since. And it's not scratched. And I was surprised when I looked at it closely, because when it's crusty, and as you use a metal spoon to scrape the souffle from the sides to get a beautiful browned piece to serve, it's easy to scratch the porcelain lining of your souffle dish. So you pretty well have to use a metal spatula, but be careful not to scratch it if you want to keep it for 45 years, 50 years, whatever that was. Okay, here's perfect pancakes. This whole talk is about eggs. And I have found that whipping the eggs in batters, before you incorporate the eggs into the batter, whip the eggs. And the more you whip the eggs, the lighter and crispier your product is going to be. So pay attention to your eggs. In this particular case, I got a pancake mix that I was mentioning before from Trader Vic's that my daughter-in-law found for us. That's pumpkin pancakes and gluten-free, delicious. I followed the instructions for their ratios, the amount of water, oil, and egg, and so forth. But I took the water, oil, and egg and really whipped them. really got a lot of froth before I rolled the pumpkin, mixed the pumpkin batter, dry ingredients in there, and the pancakes were really light and airy. So I recommend that whatever you use, whatever pancake mix you use. My normal one is Pamela's, which is just delicious, but whip them, and they'll really perform nicely. I have a very inexpensive griddle. Again, this came out of my camper. We put 70,000 miles in that griddle, dragging it all over the country. It's very inexpensive little Presto griddle, but it's Teflon, and it is the pancake making machine. I've done parties, breakfast for 20 on a camping caravan. I was turning out pancakes on that little Teflon griddle standing out in the middle of a campground. It's perfect. It's great. I love it. Yes, I could do it on the griddle on my cooktop, but it's not Teflon. And boy, does Teflon make it easier. Perfect pancakes on a very, very inexpensive griddle. Okay, please. Next one. So there they are. Now, I was saying before that you may be tired of the pumpkin spice thing and kind of overdone. And so forget my recommendation about this if you feel that way, but this is a really good mix that I had not ever seen before this last week. And thanks to my wonderful daughter-in-law, I have a new thing. I still am going to pay when I have a pancake breakfast for my whole family. I will still do my Pamela's alongside these and give people a choice there. For pumpkin spice, for your coffees, your lattes, this Turani is really good. Just a little dab will do you, though. It's like Vaseline or whatever that hair stuff was. I don't use it anymore. But a tiny bit of that Turani pumpkin seasoning for your lattes is very, very nice. Okay. So blueberry muffins. Everybody has a favorite blueberry muffin mix. I love this King Arthur one. I get it on Amazon. You have to buy 6 in the case, but there you go. I have 6 of these mixes sitting on the shelf and pull them out once or every other week or once a month or something. And I use these little silicone cups. They're very difficult to clean. I mean, the muffin literally falls out of the cup. That's great. And they withstand a very high temperature. Cook these muffins at 375, and those silicone, those are 20 years old, I think, those cups. Now, one has a little tear on it, but they really are hardy. They're just hard to clean afterwards. And so there is that. I would say if you don't have any, don't run out and buy them. Just use paper cups. And, the silicone is nice, but not that nice because of the cleanup. Now, the ingredients that go in your muffins, that's something we could talk about for a long time. Go ahead, please. I used, I prefer the wild blueberries. They're very small, and they're very, they decorate the muffin nicely. They eat nicely. They look good. I just prefer them. But I tried these great big ones. These are domestic blueberries, and they're big as quarters. I mean, they're just huge, big things. They even fall out of the muffin, as you can see. They don't distribute in there very evenly, but they are really good. So I'm saying if you don't mind them being a little bit untidy and a great big juicy thing, they're okay. And I like them. Other toppings for this muffin, this King Arthur mix that I like, is bananas and nuts. And so my recommendation to you is, and I'll talk about this next month, or maybe shouldn't even bring it up now, but no, I'm going to tell you. Take a banana, mash it with a fork on a flat plate, and add a tablespoon of sour cream to it. Oh boy, does that enhance the banana flavor. And then roll that into your muffin mix with some pecans. It's a delicious muffin. I really recommend it. Okay, I got to go fast. Perfect waffles. Now, there's my Pamela's mix. Oh boy, is that delicious. And these are the best waffles I've ever made. And their texture is light and crispy, as a waffle, to my way of thinking, should be, not heavy, dense. The waffle needs to really be a light, crispy thing, to my way of thinking. And the way to do that is, next slide, please, is to whip the heck out of those egg whites. Now, here's my eggs for this particular recipe: 2 eggs, a tablespoon of oil, 3/4 cup of water, as I recall, and just whip the heck out of them. You see in the top right, it's surprising that a whole egg, yolks and everything, will whip, but it does. And it just takes a minute by hand. And then you fold in the waffle mix, and the waffle that comes out is so light it floats. It doesn't even, it stays attached to the top. Whoever saw that before? A waffle that's attached to the top. I thought that was so comical. But they are crispy, and they are light, and they are just fabulous. All because we didn't do anything different. Same ingredients that everybody else uses. Oh, incidentally, I use 1/4 cup less mix than the recipe calls for, because the recipe calls for you to whip the whites, but adding the additional mix makes it pretty darn heavy, even though you mix the whites. So I cut that back a little bit. Okay, next slide, please. Waffle toppings. I know you're going to laugh, but I'm a kid at heart about a waffle. I love a waffle with peanut butter on it. Oh my! And so the good syrup. Let me say one thing about syrup. I cut my label off there. That's Hy-Vee brand of syrup. Maple syrup has to be maple syrup, one ingredient, and that is maple syrup. No other ingredient, no other additions, no artificial sugars, no anything. If it's called maple syrup, it's one ingredient. Where you get the differential is in the grade of the maple syrup, such as grade A. Always, of course, you want grade A, and the darkness of it. There's amber, and I think this is dark. I think it's called grade A dark. And it's a little bit more intense flavor, but I recommend grade A dark or grade A amber, and don't pay any attention to the label of the whether it's Hy-Vee or whether it's, that doesn't make any difference. The label doesn't say anything about the quality. It's the grade and the darkness. Okay. And don't you buy that awful stuff, Mrs. Butterworth's. It shouldn't even be mentioned on a quality menu. Okay, quiche. I'm going to show you 2 forms of quiche. One is quick and easy and light, and one is just the most intense, creamy, luscious thing ever. And I never make that second one until just recently. I made this one that you see right there is what I'm calling quiche divine, and it is heavy cream. I don't even cook with heavy cream, but I did this one. It is a ton of Gruyere cheese. It's a ton of Parmesan, bacon, onions, all cooked in this fabulous crust. And the first bite that my wife took of this said, "What did you do different with this quiche?" And this is our romantic dinner when we were first married. We'd have a salad and a quiche and, a glass of rosé or something, and just think that we were absolutely being totally sophisticated and romantic in that. But anyway, she tasted this one for like 40 years. I've been using half and half. And all of a sudden this last week, I gave her a quiche with heavy cream. And she said, "What did you do different?" And I said, "I use heavy cream." And she said, "All these years we could have been eating this and we had the other one." So I was found out. So go ahead with the next one there. Here's the this is a good crust. This is really a good crust. I promise you. Yeah, I know it's gluten-free. This is a good crust. Trust me, for your pumpkin pies for holidays, trust me. There's 2 in a package, and they really are packed nicely so they don't break up in the freezer. It's a good one. Don't punch holes in the bottom of it as you par-bake it. It wants to puff up a little bit as you par-bake it. Just push it down. Don't punch holes in there, because you don't want the filling to run under the crust and stick the crust to the pan, because you'll never get the pieces out of there. So don't do that. They call that docking. After you cook a quiche, let it rest. I know you're anxious to get it onto the plates there, but it's souffled in many cases. Let it set back down. So that might take 5 or 10 minutes. So and then cut it, not with a pie server, because you want something sharp to cut this with, although you run the risk of cutting through the metal pan. You'll get better serving portions if you cut it with a sharp knife. Okay, go ahead. Oh gosh, I used all my time. So this is half and half whole eggs. That's the recipe. So I need about a quart here. So I'm going to 2 cups of whole eggs, and 2 cups of half and half, and add shredded Gruyere, brown bacon, brown onions. Put the bacon in on the bottom of the crust that's already par-baked. Put the onions on there, pour the custard over the top. So season the custard with nutmeg and salt and white pepper, and then cook that in a slow oven, say 325 for a long time, like an hour and a half. Watch it, but what you want is for it to never souffle. You just want it to set like a chocolate pie, kind of set. That's texture is different than when you cook at high temperature and brown it and let it souffle. It'll be a little different. It'll be more custardy. And that's how I was always getting away with the half and half, by not cooking it at high temperature with all those bubbles and all that air and all that stuff, browning. I got the texture of whole cream by cooking it at a lower temperature. So it's kind of cheating there. Go ahead, please. Now, the quiche divine is heavy cream, 2 cups of Gruyere this is for 2 pies, by the way, and a half a cup of grated Parmesan. So Gruyere and Parmesan, very, very wonderful. 2 cups of heavy cream, nutmeg and all that. 400 for your par baking, and then reduce it to 375, and then 25 minutes high temperature browns and soufflés. Let it set and then cut it. Okay, let's go ahead. And there's the Gruyere. American cheese, I don't think, can legally call itself a Gruyere. I think it really, in order to satisfy the labeling requirements, I believe it must be imported. Only Gruyere I've ever seen is from Switzerland or Germany. Okay. Biscuits, you have your recipe. Of course, you've probably been making biscuits all your adult life, and so you have your technique down. This is a mix that I had never used before, that my daughter gave to me, again, everybody just floods me with gluten-free things. And so I had never tried this mix. And so I just used the regular biscuit method, of cutting the shortening in. Well, in this case, this called for a crazy amount of fat. It called for heavy cream. That's why I had heavy cream in the refrigerator, because I had this mix from my daughter and I wanted to do it like it said. And so I had heavy cream for this, and then I used those in the quiche. So anyway, you cut the shortening or the butter into the dry ingredients, and then you combine the liquid ingredients and you scoop it out and you put it on a thing. I wanted to mention the Silpat mats. These are silicone mats. I don't use mine very often, but I use them every time I'm making biscuits, and I'll show you why on the next one. First off, they just literally fall off of there. Look at the bottom of that biscuit on the left. It's beautifully brown. It really is nice, and it's an easy cleanup. So I recommend a Silpat mat or paper. Parchment paper is good for biscuits too. Now I'm not going to dig at keto any more than I have in previous talks that we've had. Keto has not worked for my daughter, and she's been on keto for a couple of years, and I don't think she's lost a pound in the entire time, but she sticks with it. Look what they advertised there. Total number of carbs, only 11 grams, and only 8 grams of dietary fiber and no sugar. And the net carbs is 3 grams. Okay, great. But the recipe it calls for heavy cream and butter in here, a ton of butter fat, a ton of calories. So people are thinking that they're getting, okay, enough. You hear my point. It's crazy not to count calories, to ignore calories. Keto, it's crazy. Go ahead, Jonathan. But the delicious biscuits, by the way. Okay, now I mentioned frittata in our promotion for today's talk. A souffle, an omelet. My omelet, souffle, they are thick, double the size. No one can believe that they're getting a 2-egg omelet. And the reason is I have a really hot pan. And I start getting the liquid off of the top of there almost immediately. And you can see the bubbles in I have really beat the heck out of these 2 eggs before I put them in the omelet pan. And they cook so quickly, just minutes, and I flip them over. Now, the little bit unsightly, I got to admit, it's not a smooth thing. It's not 2 millimeters thick and spread out all over the whole pan. It's souffled, but the texture when you eat my omelet it's light. It's not dense. It's not like hard scrambled egg. It's light because of the air I incorporate in and how fast I go. A frittata is nothing more than go ahead and cook your ingredients in the souffle pan itself. Ham, the onions, mushrooms, green peppers, whatever you like. Cook them in the pan, then put the custard on top of that, and hot, and flip your whole thing over. Frittata, individual portion of frittata, not cooked in the oven as you would. But so I recommend beating the heck out of these eggs to lighten all of your ingredients up. All of your entrees up. Okay. So poached eggs, I just want to say one thing. You would not want to put eggs Benedict on a brunch menu for 4 or 8 people without having some real tricks, because poaching for your family of 8, poaching 16 eggs a la minute is impossible. You can't time it. You're just going to be a mess. But you can do them 2 days ahead, as restaurants do. poach the egg to the right temperature, and then plunge it into a pan of ice water, and hold them in the refrigerator for 2 days. And then to serve them, all you have to do is just put them over into a pan of simmering water to warm them up, and then dry them off and put them right on top of the Canadian bacon or your English muffins or so forth. And you could do eggs Benedict for a pretty big crowd very quickly by yourself. You could toast the English muffins ahead of time and just hold them at room temperature. They don't need to be hot. And Canadian bacon, easy, warmed up, poached egg right on top of that. Now the holidays is a whole different thing. We'll talk about holidays some other time. That's the hard part of the eggs Benedict. Okay, go ahead, John. Sausage and bacon. Oh, cook these in the oven. If I know it seems like a mess, your oven, there are going to be splatters in the oven and all that stuff, but it's so much more presentable for a small crowd or even a big crowd. I've literally cooked bacon for a breakfast, a plated breakfast for 1,200 people. And I had bacon on the menu and I cooked it in the oven. I cooked bacon all night long to have it ready to go for that breakfast. 1,200 people. I don't know how many pounds of bacon we did, but we cooked all night long. I cooked all night long. I do at home. I always cook bacon on foil. I always cook it in the oven, 350, 20 minutes for thick sliced bacon. It's flat. It's uniformly cooked. It doesn't curl. It's great. And sausage, the same way. Sausage is hard. Now it's much more presentable if you buy sausage that's already in patties. If you buy the Jimmy Dean delicious all natural Jimmy Dean in those things, and you cut it, it really is your appearance is not going to be nearly as good as if you buy sausage for your brunch, for your family and your small group. Buy it already in patties, cook it in the oven. You'll like that much better than any kind of pan. Okay, go ahead. And let's have a mimosa. I just think brunch with a mimosa is pretty cool, and it can be virgin. There's no reason in the world to think that you need to have any kind of sparkling wine. It certainly could be sparkling soda to give you that effervescence. But the quality of the orange juice is pretty important. There are some awesome frozen orange juices with premium ingredients, and I tell you, I would sure think about it for a mimosa. I want to give a shout out to Saint Hilaire. That bottle right there costs $12 at my liquor store, and it is good. I know the wine snobs or the cork dorks or whatever they're called are gonna frown, but that is delicious sparkling wine in the champagne method, and it costs $12, and it makes a great mimosa. You don't feel bad putting an expensive wine in your mimosa, so I recommend it. I think it's great. Okay, let's go ahead, please. So I want to offer you the savory cheese soufflé recipe and the pumpkin chiffon pie recipe that I have not met. Let me mention more about that. This is taking egg whites to the next level for meringue. And meringue, again, nobody could do meringue by hand. That'd just be impossible, because you're going to take those egg whites and roll the ingredients into the egg whites to turn this into this amazing candy called meringue. and it's so beautiful and so delicious, and just such a wonderful thing. And if you take that meringue then and add in some gelatin and some cooked pumpkin pie filling that's cooked in a pan, not in an oven, so that you're going to cook the pumpkin pie with eggs and so forth and make a pumpkin custard, then roll it into with the meringue, you end up with a mousse, pumpkin mousse. And so if you had a par-baked pie crust that was all ready to eat, then you would take that pumpkin mousse and fill it. It's so light and airy and aromatic. It's just wonderful. And you fill your pie shell decoratively with this mousse and put it in the refrigerator. So it sets, but you don't bake it. So that's what that is. So we've used egg whites in every dish today. I think everything I did, this is really like an egg lab. And we beat the heck out of most of them to get volume. And in this particular case, for your cheese soufflé and for the pumpkin chiffon, you're going to even take it further by incorporating the beaten egg whites with sugar to build a meringue. But you need a really heavy duty mixer to do this. Do not try it with a small portable, a puny little portable. Now, there are strong portables, so be my guest. If the whip that comes with the mixer is the same diameter as a stand mixer, great, go for it. It's so much easier. My mixer weighs probably 30 plus pounds. And to get it up on the counter, I think twice before I pull my stand mixer out. It is so darn heavy. So there's that. And if I were buying a mixer today, though, and I may have to buy a mixer after the holidays because mine is grinding a little bit and it's just, like I say, I can't get it repaired. I will buy another stand mixer just like Hobart has one. KitchenAid, I'm sorry. KitchenAid has one for a 5-quart one, and it's pretty reasonable. There's bigger ones and way expensive, but that 5-quart one is not nearly as expensive as the big 6-quart commercial one. So I recommend it. So we'll post those 2 recipes on Jonathan will post those, and I recommend them. It's good reading, and I attribute those to Good Eats and to Julia Child, and I put my little 2 cents worth in there to more modern adaptations and things that I can do in my kitchen with what I have easier. The last thing I wanted to mention, do I have time? Mm-hmm. I wanted to mention, I baked this banana nut bread recipe today. I've made this recipe. I want to say I've made this recipe 25 times. And it's a very challenging recipe because you have to cream, butter, sugar, then add in slowly whole egg beaten, and you develop this light, fluffy sugar, butter, egg base, and then you roll in all the dry ingredients. Again, in a mixer, this would be a hard thing to make by hand. Get all the dry ingredients, and then you incorporate the banana that I mentioned to you, where I had banana and a little sour cream. And that's getting to be a really heavy batter. And then the nuts on top of that, in a crazy amount of nuts. So every time my son sees this, he said, "There's a lot of nuts in here." He had never would have done that in a professional kitchen where he works, have so many nuts because of the economy of the thing. So he's always surprised at how many nuts I put in my banana nut bread, but he eats. He loves it. So I recommend the amount of nuts that I use. But anyway, I made this recipe 25 times. You'd think I'd have it down. It's very difficult. It's a difficult recipe. The batter breaks if the butter's too soft, or if the eggs hit the butter and the eggs are cold. It's just, technique is everything in this. Having everything at the right temperature, and not trying to add the eggs too fast, and not overbeating and underbeating. It's a little tough little recipe. And then you don't know how it's doing inside. Things change. I mean, although you use the same recipe and you measure your ingredients very carefully, if you don't watch your technique, from one day to the next, with the same ingredients in the same oven and the same pan, everything the same, you get a different result. Because maybe there's a little more moisture in the flour this time. Maybe the egg is a little bigger than it was the last time that you made it. It calls for one egg, but the eggs can vary by a lot. So it's a tough recipe, and I sometimes get it too gooey, not too gooey. I don't never get gooey, but it's moist in the middle, and it shouldn't be. It should be done in the middle, just to the right thing. So here's the secret. I finally, after making this recipe for years and years and years, I finally got one that was done just right. And I measured the temperature of the bread as I was cooking it. And the recipe calls for 55 or 60 minutes. I always cook it 65 minutes, but now I know to cook it 65 minutes or until it reaches 210 Fahrenheit, right in the middle of the cake. And it's done like a champ. It's done like a champ. So I'm saying, if you have recipes that you love and you repeat over and over and over, get the temperature on the thing when you really have nailed the internal doneness, or when you've reached the point where you are going to pull it out of the oven. And how would you know that a bread is done, or those muffins are done, or anything else, unless you measure precisely the internal temperature? So I told my son, the chef, been a chef for 30 years. He works in a kitchen that does 250 breakfast, lunches, and dinner a day, every day, 250, 7 days a week, 250. And he has had professional bakers who work for him who didn't do this. And he put them onto measuring the temperature of things that they do over and over again to really get more predictable results. So I recommend it as you get ready to do your holiday cooking. Check the internal temperature of things. You know that those old, I've thrown mine out, but I had candy thermometer that I've always used for all of my holiday baking. And that candy thermometer full of mercury, right? I think. Dangerous thing to have around in the kitchen, made of glass and gets banged around in the drawer. I was always afraid that I was going to break that thing. And it's hard to read. It's got the little line there for the soft boil, soft ball temperature. Is it soft ball, or can't remember? But anyway, the soft temperature. And then there's the hard candy temperature. And I always miss that because of the difficulty of putting that little mercury glass candy thermometer down in the syrup or whatever I was trying to get to the right temperature, until this came along. Oh my gosh. All of a sudden, my fudge works every time. My peanut butter fudge works every time, because I get this to the soft ball temperature precisely. And then I get it off of the fire and I roll in the fudge or the peanut butter or whatever the heck. And it sets so quickly, but it's not granular. You know how the fudge, when you don't do it right, it's grainy, it's smooth. The top, you can't overwork the top because you can really make it ugly, but the top is shiny. I mean, I didn't do anything different except get a more precise thermometer for my candy making. And it's changed. So my breads, I check everything. I check the temperature of my steaks, my chops, everything that's on the grill, hamburgers. I use this thing all the time. I'm always checking the temperature of things. I even check the temperature of the water that I make my pour over coffee with so that it's right. You don't want it too hot. So I really want to emphasize for your holiday cooking how much it will improve your cooking if you get precise, and then keep notes about all of your things. I have these recipes that we've been cooking for all of our married life. I took them over from my wife, and I'll talk about them next month. The fudge, the peanut butter fudge, and then pecan pie, and all of these things that I always do for the holidays. And I can't eat any of them now because they're all made with flour. So I'll make them for all my family and give them to my neighbors for presents and everything to get ready to talk to you all next month about them. But everything, all those old recipes are improved with the new techniques, silicone mats, parchment paper that I never had in my kitchen until recently, and an oven that's really, really precise to a degree, and my induction cooktop and my heavyweight pans that cook so evenly. All of these recipes now work, not because I'm a better cook, but I have better. In fact, I'm not as good a cook, but I have better utensils and pans and silicone spatulas. Oh, for crying out loud, all those years of burning up the rubber spatulas as I was trying to make candy with them. So all of that has improved with these new things. And so my recipes are kind of predictable now. They didn't used to be. And the last thing, and I'm totally spoiling my thunder, what I'm going to talk about next month was, get this baking done ahead of time. Oh, for crying out loud. Don't try to do this stuff. So you're trying to wrap presents and get everybody together and be the host and hostess and all of that. Do everything that you can do ahead of time. Poaching the eggs, slicing the bread, the banana nut bread and so forth that you have, pumpkin breads. All of these things, bake them, slice them, put parchment paper between them, wrap them and freeze them, and they'll think you're just the most genius and competent cook. And you did all this stuff in November for your December holiday party. So take advantage of your freezer. Everything freezes. There isn't anything that you can't freeze. I freeze the Gruyere cheese, by the way, that I didn't use for this, and it's sitting in the freezer. And next time I need it, I'll pull it out. Oh, last thing about Gruyere cheese. It's soft. It melts very well. It does not shred very well. But I wanted to mention to you that for a souffle, you want to shred your cheese if you use Gruyere or Emmentaler Swiss. One more thing about Gruyere cheese. In Switzerland, the most popular cheese is not Emmentaler, the big hole. No, it's Gruyere of all the things. It's a wonderful cheese, but it doesn't shred real easy, especially if it's warm. So keep it cold and it'll shred. You might even have to break it up, kind of rolls up in little balls. It doesn't shred real easy, but that's the right texture. You don't want to go any finer. You won't be able to go any finer with it. Okay, good. Oh, I'm so glad to have talked to you today about this. And I hope that I have anticipated some of the things that you're going to be doing for your family for the holidays. My best wishes to you for Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next month.